Dr. Stephen Barrows is the Chief Operating Officer of Acton Institute. Prior to his role at Acton, Dr. Barrows served as the Provost and Dean of Faculty at Aquinas College in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he also served as a tenured professor of economics. Steve also served 21 years in the U.S. Air Force as an acquisition officer, an economics professor at the U.S. Air Force Academy, and a faculty member at the National Military Academy of Afghanistan. He retired from the Air Force in 2013 at the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. His talk today is titled AI's Economic Impact, Displacement, Productivity, and the Future of Labor. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Barrows.
Thank you, Scott. And as Scott noted, I am an economist by academic background. And as an economist, I'm always looking, of course, for opportunities for market exchange to achieve what we call Pareto improvements. And this morning, speaking with my colleague and friend Michael Matheson Miller, I seized an opportunity and saw that Michael, and I want to make very clear up front, did not exceed his time, but I sold him 11 minutes of my time for a really good price. So, well, it's really an honor to be here at the Pontifical Gregorian University, and I've learned so much, not only in the conversations that were occurring this morning, but just listening to the previous talks. In fact, Carl, thanks so much for your discussion of work and the actual changes to the workplace. What I'm going to do is discuss things in a labor perspective, but more from a macroeconomic standpoint. So, of course, Catholic social teaching has long engaged the topic of labor market disruptions and their impact on individual lives and families. That engagement includes the implications of technological change for workers. Now, Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum, of course, set the stage by articulating essential principles for a harmonious social order and considered the labor question through the lens of the reciprocal obligations of employers and employees. Pope Pius XI then built upon his predecessor's teaching in Quadragesimo Anno and made brief reference to technical and economic progress. But it was perhaps Pope Pius XII's 1957 encyclical called Miranda Prorsus that marks the beginning of an amplified focus on technological disruptions. Pius XII opened that encyclical by stating, quote, "Those very remarkable technical inventions which are the boast of the men of our generation, though they spring from human intelligence and industry, are nevertheless gifts from God, our Creator, from whom all good gifts proceed. For he has not only brought forth creatures, but sustains and fosters them once created," end quote. Yet, as we've already heard today, every technical invention brings both costs and benefits, and Pius XII cautioned in that same encyclical that machines also had reduced some men to, quote, "a state of slavery and caused grievous harm," end quote. Now, the intersection of technological progress and church teaching continued, of course, with St. John the 23rd in Mater et Magistra, St. Paul VI in Populorum Progressio, and St. John Paul II's Laborem Exercens and Sollicitudo Rei Socialis, among, of course, other documents. And finally, Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis devote major sections on technology in two of their encyclicals. Benedict included an entire chapter on the development of peoples and technology in Caritas in Veritate. And Francis devoted significant sections of Laudato Si on the topic. Both popes highlight technology's trade-offs, with the latter warning us, I think as Michael brought up, against succumbing to the so-called technological paradigm. While there are new and potentially unique disruptions from artificial intelligence, Catholic social teaching, I think, can in fact guide us with moral principles for its ethical development, while at the same time offering prudential economic considerations which can prevent a reactionary suppression of technological developments which may otherwise promote human flourishing. So let me now address Pope Leo XIV's manifest interest in the technology of artificial intelligence, and specifically the impact AI will have on labor displacement and productivity. Many economists and social scientists speculate on how AI will affect labor markets and at times their estimates vary widely. So on one end of the spectrum, in 2013, scholars Carl Benedict Fry and Michael Osborne estimated that the growth of computerization, advanced robotics, and machine learning more broadly entailed that nearly half of US jobs would be at high risk for automation over the course of the next 2 decades. Others, on the other hand, firmly believe the artificial intelligence industry is presently in a bubble, akin to the dot-com bubble of a quarter a century ago, and thereby creating a significant job loss risk of an entirely different kind when that bubble inevitably bursts. On a more positive note, Sam Manning and Thomas Aguirre of GovAI find evidence that the vast majority of jobs that are exposed to the advances in artificial intelligence consist of workers whose adaptive capacities are above the average. That, of course, is good news, since technological disruptions to the workforce are inevitable in a growing economy, and the greater workers' adaptive capacities are, the more absorbable are the harms from displacement will be. It is, of course, too early to tell how widespread displacement from this new general-purpose technology will be on various labor markets, although displacement and augmentation are already occurring. Stanford University economist Eric Brynjolfsson and colleagues estimated last month that young workers in occupations, that many young workers are most exposed to AI in those occupations that are most closely affiliated with those processes, such as software developers and customer support. And in fact, they estimated, and I'm quoting here, that they have already experienced a 16% relative employment decline in those most exposed occupations, end quote. So various studies tracking AI adoption rates also indicate that adoption is rising rapidly, and a recent study by Penn Wharton estimates that generative AI will increase US productivity and gross domestic product by 1.5% by 2035. So those are just some details. Now, regardless of whether one assumes that AI's transformative effects are similar to major technological disruptions which have preceded it, or is something fundamentally unique, we can still draw the same principles from the corpus of Catholic social teaching to guide our response to these disruptions. From the mechanization of the first industrial revolution, or the mechanization that catalyzed the first industrial revolution, to the combustion engine and electrification of factories that generated the second industrial revolution, whichever revolution it is, some laborers have always been made more productive by technology, while others were put out of work, and still others found new dignified work in those industries that were triggered by the new technology. That always happens. And it's important to point out that technological advances don't have to be complex for them to be highly consequential. Consider the modern shipping container. Had it not been for the persistence and vision of Malcolm McLean in standardizing that shipping container, we might not have seen the rapid expansion of global trade, where the cost of shipping is often inconsequential to businesses deciding on which goods ought to be exchanged globally. Yet the lowly shipping container opened markets globally and was highly disruptive, not only to an industry, but to the entire world. Longshoremen fought to keep their jobs, unions would become violent, and an entire organized crime had to adjust to all sorts of new tactics when they moved away from cargo nets. So today's largest container ships can carry up to 20,000 and sometimes more shipping containers, which of course port cranes can offload directly onto tractor trailers or rail cars to be scurried off to their final destination. And I don't think anybody would want to go back to the days when longshoremen dragged cargo nets and rolled barrels hand by hand from ship to truck. Now, some argue that in contrast to ordinary computers which merely execute pre-programmed tasks, generative artificial intelligence is fundamentally different because it imitates human reasoning and creates new content on its own. Yet even if that is the case, there is still an important distinction to be made between what aspects of human work are easily replaced by AI and which aspects are not. As Arvind Narayan and Shayash Kapoor explain in their intriguing essay, AI as Normal Technology, quote, while GPT-4 reportedly achieves scores in the top 10% of bar exam test takers, this tells us remarkably little about AI's ability to practice law, end quote. Until there is notable evidence to the contrary, I think it's important to begin with what we know, namely that AI is already disrupting labor markets in ways both foreseen and unforeseen. And for now, I think the apocalyptic versions of these disruptions are overhyped. Furthermore, new jobs are already arising, such as prompt engineers, AI ethicists, AI trainers, and the like. Early studies are indicating patterns similar to past technological disruption, displacement, yet also the enhancement of worker productivity and the creation of new tasks, jobs, and work to accompany those disruptions. A recent National Bureau of Economic Research analysis found, quote, a strong positive association between AI adoption and firm performance. A 1 standard deviation increase in AI utilization is associated with about 12% higher productivity, 31% higher sales, 42% higher profits, and 11% higher average pay. That same study also found that, quote, a 1 standard deviation increase in AI adoption leads to a 6.8% increase in firm employment, end quote. So it appears that artificial intelligence is poised to bring the same kinds of economic trade-offs that all technological disruption brings. So given that artificial intelligence will inevitably disrupt labor markets, what principles should guide our response? I think those principles are the same ones that apply to other forms of disruption. It's important to remember that disruption and change are always intrinsic to an economic system rooted in private property, free enterprise, the rule of law, and the common good. Central to such an economic system is the price system, and price changes are inevitably good for some parties and bad for other parties. Tech advancements always change relative prices and reallocate capital and labor in various ways. This, of course, is the result of free, creative minds finding better ways to do things, designing better recipes, and discovering new methods to overcome the phenomenon of material scarcity. And no regulation, law, or taxing power, get water, getting really dry. No regulation, law, or taxing power can fully insulate the labor market from these very natural changes that result from human action. The creation and destruction of jobs arises also from other sorts of changes. Globalizing trade or restricting trade is going to upend that. Enhancing consumer demand or suppressing consumer demand will do the very same sorts of things. And new technologies which make the old ones obsolete will still again disrupt labor markets. So this is the inevitability of change driven by human action, which is why, as Pope Benedict XVI reminded us in Caritas in Veritate, the modern economy must also be animated by a spirit of gift centered on the person. So technological progress enhances economic growth and human flourishing while creating collateral harms. The labor market displacement created by artificial intelligence entails the spread of what Dominican economist and theologian Father Albino Barrera calls a negative pecuniary externality. To address these negative financial spillovers to others caused by AI, it's important that public policy remove unnecessary friction, which hinders the adaptive capacities of individuals who lose their jobs. So unnecessary occupational licensing, deterrence to the free movement of labor, obstacles which lock out others from their right to work, each of these then can create added harms. Naturally, of course, adaptive capacities vary from person to person, and this calls for our particular attention. In certain cases, and perhaps maybe in many cases, technological progress can trigger large clusters of workers to lose their jobs at once, and alternative occupations are often elusive. More importantly, sometimes these negative spillover effects are particularly severe for certain individuals and particular families. In those cases, it is incumbent to use the principles of subsidiarity and solidarity to address and alleviate those harms. And by the way, those changes and those harms aren't necessarily the result of injustice. In fact, labor market churn and turnover is a natural and inevitable result of human action and may not manifest injustice at all. Furthermore, technological advancement in the long run is a vital component to enhancing worker productivity and raising society's standard of living as a whole. It is here that I think the great Catholic social encyclicals I referenced at the beginning of my talk can provide significant insight and guidance. But there is one aspect of AI and the labor question that I think is unique from prior disruptions and requires deeper reflection because it has implications for how businesses, consumers, and families build, implement, and make use of AI. So let me elaborate by first referencing a scene from a film that Pope Leo has identified as one of his favorites. That's the classic American tale, It's a Wonderful Life. Now, for those of you who have not seen that, the film's amiable protagonist, George Bailey, finds himself in big trouble through no fault of his own. In a despairing moment, he expresses to his guardian angel Clarence that he wishes that he had never been born. Now, God grants him his wish and gives George the opportunity to see what life would have been like had he never come into existence. In the film's pivotal moment, when the realization of a world without him becomes clear to George, Clarence gently remarks to him, "Strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many other lives. When he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he?" Artificial intelligence is already displacing and augmenting labor and creating new jobs, yet it is also poised to indirectly do something else, I think, something that is perhaps not new, but may be uniquely powerful compared to the technological advances which have preceded it. Let me explain. Brown University economist Oded Galor has persuasively argued that the accelerated technological progress has raised the importance of investing in human capital, and that as investments in human capital become more important, parents tend to have fewer children and invest more in their development instead. In other words, he claims, technological progress has been a major contributor to declining fertility over the past 2 centuries. In that sense, as yet another technological advance, AI's impact on declining fertility is no different from other major advances in technology. What is perhaps unique, however, is this. Insofar as artificial intelligence evolves into some kind or form of artificial humanity, it pretends not merely the displacement of labor, but also the displacement of human relationships. And this is an important factor for the future of labor. The dramatic decline in fertility rates in our modern world has a very simple explanation. On the one hand, it's just the result of declining coupling, okay, and or coupling that is less fertile. That, by the way, can be the result of both choice and circumstance. Okay, it depends. So the social science Alice Evans posits that much of the recent decline in coupling has been triggered by the ubiquitous diffusion of smartphones, which have occupied our lives through the constant distractions of social media, screen time addiction, and other forms of digital engagement which crowd out authentic, embodied human relationships. Our time has been hijacked and social connections have become frayed. artificial intelligence may amplify this, having an outsized impact on human fertility and thus harming future number of workers. Subreplacement fertility rates and declining population have significant economic consequences as the global population ages and workforces peak in various nations. It is here, I think, that the church can offer an important guidance to ensure that artificial intelligence serves humanity rather than enslaves or displace it. As AI entrepreneurs and builders dialogue with the church about the rapid diffusion of artificial intelligence, we should look to the great social encyclicals I've referenced before. Yet, perhaps, artificial intelligence should point us to something else. Although AI can never be an artificial substitute for humanity as such, because there is no, of course, true replacement for the person as a person, artificial intelligence can disrupt those human relationships. And so, surprisingly, as relevant as the social encyclicals are, we may want to actually reconsider something else. And that is St. Paul VI, Humanae Vitae, which contains the church's perennial moral teachings on the transmission of human life. The tools of artificial intelligence could substantially reconfigure human relationships, worsening fertility decline, and it could, by the way, have enhancing fertility effects insofar as it helps adjust to infertility problems through medical applications. But it could also, going back to some of the things that Michael alluded to, enhance illicit methods of fertility, which could have all sorts of unintended consequences. So, artificial intelligence then has great potential, I think, to promote the well-being of humanity by helping us to overcome the conditions of material scarcity. And to the extent that AI does this, surely it's a gift from God. At the same time, humanity must not let AI displace humanity as such. Through the slow, creeping danger of disrupting embodied relationships which lead to love, fertility, and the passing on of human life to the next generation. In Antiqua et Nova, the church emphasizes that the advent of AI calls us to a, quote, renewed appreciation of all that is human, end quote. And of course, the transmission of human life is something that AI will never be able to do. That is something uniquely human. AI may very well enable us to achieve many great things that we couldn't have imagined just a few short decades ago, but what it cannot do is enable us to achieve true progress in its fullest sense. And what is that true progress? St. John Paul II answered that question in his final Wednesday audience, closing out his years-long reflections on the theology of the body. In that final address, he explained that progress cannot be merely measured by advances in technology. Instead, he pointed to his predecessor's encyclical on the transmission of human life, explaining that its content has, quote, existential meaning for establishing what true progress consists in, that is, the development of the human person, end quote. So like all technological disruptions which have come before it, AI is going to augment and displace labor and create new jobs. It will also promote economic growth more than likely, but only by keeping church teaching as our North Star can we inoculate ourselves from letting a kind of artificial humanity crowd out human relationships and displace true humanity. That, rather than labor market disruptions, is AI's unique risk. And it at the same time gives us an opportunity and a responsibility to shape AI so that it makes us more productive and enhances human flourishing. Thank you.